So as usual, the guests' full bios are in the Dropbox, and I sincerely recommend reading them because they're both incredible artistic leaders nationally, with deep roots in Los Angeles as well. So first, Leslie Ishii is the artistic director of Perseverance Theater. She's a director, educator, actor, and a national leader in American theater. Jonathan Muñoz-Proulx is an Ovation Award nominated director and director of cultural programming at A Noise Within. And both of them are hyphenates, multi-talented, multidisciplinary, multi-wonderful folks. So please do read the full bios. I'm going to end the poll in a second. Oh, we've got some other. I'd focus on diversity across all boards, see what kind of productions have been done in the past and which voices should be elevated moving forward. Opportunities, new works, encouraging black box small theater works. Awesome, pre-professional artists, really good thinking going in there. So I'm going to end the polling. So this is really interesting. Which of these statements do you agree with? So a lot of people agreed with, I have stories that I want to tell. Next up, I belong to a creative community. I feel empowered by the art I make. My identity informs the art I make. Only 45% say I know who I am as an artist, and only 43% I can describe who I am as an artist to other people. Yeah, that it's two different things sometimes. But I love 78% I have stories I want to tell. Very interesting. Okay. Now, as you all are thinking about that chat question, I have another chat question as well. This one is also a big, meaty question, and this one was asked by our two guests when we were doing our prep session. So thinking about what is leadership and what are the ways that leadership is demonstrated? What does that mean to you, being a leader? What does leadership mean to you? So start pondering on that, and if you're ready to start sharing on that, please do add that to the chat as well. And in the meantime, hello guests. I'm going to start with Jonathan. Can you give us your name, your pronouns, if you would like to do a land acknowledgement, welcome that. And then we've talked about what is that kind of big seminal theater experience. Whatever pops into your head first is probably the one, something that's really lived in you, either from a show that you've worked on, seen, experienced, read. So I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan.
Hi, everyone. Gosh, I'm so grateful to be here. My name is Jonathan Muñoz-Proulx. I'm a freelance director and director of cultural programming at A Noise Within. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I live and work in Los Angeles on Gabrielino Tongva land, but right now I am living in San Diego, which is Kumeyaay land. And I also want to acknowledge, this is so silly, but I'm a director and I usually, you know, I speak and I work in small ensembles and communities, and I get nervous on these things. I see like how many people are watching, so I just want to acknowledge my anxiety, and my palms are sweating a little bit. So please watch with grace. An event that has stuck with me. I'm going to cheat just a little bit, and I'm changing it in the very last minute. It's actually not something I saw on stage. It's something that sort of happened behind the scenes, and I'll be brief with it. And that is, not so long ago, I mean, 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago max, I was working full time in the corporate world, and I was directing, you know, for free on evenings and weekends, not getting paid as an artist. And I told my mentors, I give up. Like, I can't do this. I'm pissed at theater. I'm worried that in a decade or two, I'm going to look at my life and I'll look at the sacrifices I made and what I haven't gained from that investment of time, and I'm going to hate theater. And I was ready to stop. It made no sense for me. And then a mentor came to a little tiny workshop I did in a 20-seat theater. And this was a mentor who happened to have some power in the community. And he said to me afterwards, I know you emailed me saying you want to stop this. I think you should keep doing this. And that really stuck with me, but more so than that, he called me 3 days later while I was watching a play, and I left the theater, and he said, I want to offer you a job that actually started my career. So I just want to acknowledge that how necessary it is to hear that validation And I want to acknowledge how important it is that if you have power to say what you see, because we need to nurture our community.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that. I love that. Yeah, that turning point moment. And I'm certainly glad that you didn't leave the field. And Leslie, it's so good to be with you virtually in this space. I want to invite you to answer the same questions. So your name, your pronouns, if you want to do a land acknowledgement, and then what came into your mind as that theater experience.
Great. Thank you, Camille. Thank you to you and Felipe. And I love this. Every time you curate a space, it's wonderful. And I've just known you to have that beautiful gift with all your multi-talents too. So thank you for bringing us into the space, and always a pleasure, Jonathan. And Felipe, thank you for your support. I've appreciated your leadership at Center Theater Group too. So thank you. Leslie Ishii, Artistic Director here at Perseverance Theater. And interesting question, because I am kind of a newish artistic director here, just ending the first year, starting the next, really the first new chapter of Perseverance Theater. And I am on the Tlingit Ani of the Occoquan and Takaquan. And we also known as Juneau. This is downtown Juneau in my background here. And we also serve communities up in the Dena'ina Ani, Dena'ina land, which is also known as Anchorage. And with the virtual, kind of realm now, we've been wanting to serve more of the state of Alaska. So we look forward to serving more of the Alaska Native community as well as the greater Alaska community. I think, gosh, there's so many. I feel fortunate. I have had so many kind of moments in theater that just struck me or lifted me or even moved me forward. But I'll speak of one very recently because it has to do with my own best practices and my continued self-education. And that is getting here and directing the first show of this last season. We inherited the season, but gratefully, I had already been slated to direct Devilfish by Vera Starbard, who is Tlingit Dena'ina of the Tlingit peoples and Dena'ina peoples here. She's Alaska Native. And I basically knew I was already dedicated and committed to decolonizing theater, decolonizing to indigenize, and I say to liberate our spaces, because that really liberates spaces for everyone. And in that moment of starting that process, I learned the real role of a director is actually most of the time more of a facilitator, to create space that's truly aware, equitable, and inclusive. So to hold space for Alaska Native artists to take the lead and really make the theater their space, truly, after it's had a history of only white leaders and mostly white community. It was an honor to go through protocols. It's kind of my own Japanese heritage as well, to first come into Juneau and meet the elders first, say I'm on your land, and start that dialogue and eventual partnership, and that continues gratefully. And then to begin to decolonize our space. We talk about decolonization in a very general term, really, but what does it mean to decolonize on the specific land upon which you are set? So to get to know the Tlingit, Haida, Tsimshian people here, and those artists that were coming in that we had the great honor and fortune of creating space for, how do we create Tlingit Dena'ina Tsimshian decolonization, and therefore make sure they feel welcome from that point on. It's their space from that point on. And it occurs to me, we also in decolonization recognize the history. So right on the very land upon which the Perseverance Theater, where it's set, where it's built, Molly Smith originally built that. This is her first baby, actually. Now she's at arena stage. That's exactly where they burnt the Tlingit village to make way for the gold mine. And it was while they were away during a particular season, which is this season, the fish camp, to create a harvest sustenance for the rest of the year, the fall and the winter. So, but there were still many Tlingit peoples who were killed as well. So we want to recognize when we're on that land occupying, what is the history? And that changed me. That just changed me to know upon, what is the history where I'm at in any given place, so I can be most respectful and recognize they're still here, which means that decolonizing strategy didn't work. It's an unsuccessful strategy. We're continuing to decolonize, however, because it still wreaks havoc. But how can I make those changes, recognize the history? And that is what I started to do first as an artistic director. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you. That's fascinating. So you've been there for about a year now, right?
Mm.
Okay. I think a good place to start, and then I'll ask Jonathan a similar question, is I know that when I first started working in theater, I didn't have a really clear sense of the role of an artistic director.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about, and you just told us part of what you do, what your focus has been. What does it mean to be an artistic director? What is under your purview, and what's your day to day?
Oh, that's a good one. Well, I've had the opportunity, great honor and fortune to be kind of next to a lot of artistic directors, like at East West Players, Penumbra in the Twin Cities, one of the preeminent legacy Black theaters, El Teatro Campesino, Luis Valdez. Some of my earliest jobs came from legacy theaters of color. So I've had those great models. And then with my work as a facilitator with ArtEquity, and I continue to work with them for equity, diversity, inclusion, and access training throughout the field, which is about real art, organizational, cultural, change. I really believe it's all about dismantling. I come in and it's not, I've told folks I wasn't upwardly mobile. I felt called to apply. So I felt called to service. So I applied. And we're nonprofits first, which means you serve for the good of the public, for public good. So that's my first mandate, which meant I'm actually in service to community. So one of the first things I also did was listening to Alaska Native elders and artists. And we had artist forums because there's been a long history, some very up and down with this theater. So I'm also called to often be a healer and a mediator. And like I mentioned just a minute ago, I'm changing my view of what a director does and what an artistic director does. I think I'm a facilitator. Because I'm not upwardly mobile and I came through directing as an actor, which I still once in a while get called in, and that makes me very nervous. It's terrifying in my mind, but it's thrilling. I understand why folks continue, my husband included. He's an actor through and through. But I was always multidisciplinary, so I had that to bring to the table. But I also believe that in the process of dismantling white supremacist culture and colonizing and indigenizing, I do believe that it's not about having a long list of shows I've always ever wanted to produce, and now that I'm in positional power, I finally get to be at the helm and say, this is what we're doing, because that actually supports patriarchy. Because we've had primarily male leaders in this field throwing up a season, saying this is what we're doing, and making everybody else scramble to make meaning of it, raise funds, try to produce it, all of that. And market it, even get people in the door. I believe those days should be gone. And in my theater now, our theater, they're gone. We don't work like that. It's a big team, and I facilitate the space to the point of we've actually moved the slots of when the dates are, rehearsal start and end of run, so that we don't have so many payrolls going on at the same time. Because if you overlap shows and you're paying, and this theater's coming out of a financial crisis. So it's never been clocked that your payrolls actually overlap. And that's a lot of people to pay during a time when when you're outside of a grant cycle. So you don't have cash flow. Instead, again, the patriarchal white supremacist model says everybody else, you're supposed to make meaning and figure that out. But no one ever actually named what was happening. So I go and we work as a team. How do we move the actual show slots? So, and how do we line it up with when we have grant money actually coming in, and or other revenue streams, whether it's ticket sales. And we also plan for reserve. Because you're a nonprofit, there's this idea you have to zero out. It's not true. You can actually plan for reserve and have an emergency fund, because things happen. We know that. So you don't have to furlough people, so that you can actually make sure people are getting professional training or opportunities. You help grow your staff. That's how you create retention. Otherwise, small to mid-sized theaters are a stepping stone. You also, now that's understandable, because you can go to a big house, probably get your equity weeks and get insurance. Totally get it. And we do our best to offer weeks and all that too. But so we know our artists need to work at every level. That's how you just keep getting work and piece together a living. Whether you're a designer or you're an actor, or maybe you're an administrator that you share. We're sharing you with another org. But so I'm just breaking down what is the actual structure so that we can actually all thrive. But I say sustained thrivability, not just thrive for 5 minutes while we have a hit show, but sustained thrivability. So I think I might be off track of the original question, but that's where it took me about ADing and what my daily task is. It's really that. Also, just know any organization is about people. When you put people first, most of your day is going to be about talking with people, or they'll bring you their challenges. And it's important. I make time for people all day long. And then I do my admin later. And sometimes I tell people my admin's coming. I give a heads up about when I can answer back. And I do a lot of texting, say, I'll answer you when I have this moment. But I always make time for the artist, the staff member needing to talk. Yeah. I'll put a pause button there. Wow.
That's so helpful. And I mean, there's so many things in there that really resonated with me, and also just struck me as like being about systems thinking, being about the big picture, and being an organizational leader as well as the artistic leader.
Yeah.
Right. That it's both of those. But it's about community and bringing people together more than like, oh, this is my vision and I'm bringing you my vision and you're welcome for my vision.
Yeah. And there may be a place along the way I'll say, hey, I'd love to do this. But here's the other part about season planning. They say, what are you going to choose, Les? I go, you mean, what are we choosing? You all have to do the work along with me. It's got to be something you're excited about. So we actually set up a whole process of people brought plays to the table. Okay, we set up small group work. They read. They actually had a form to fill out so they could give their feedback. And then we kept coming together in staff meetings to actually tease it out. Well, and then we got into production, like, well, can we produce that? What does that look like? When? What time of year? So we really, as a team, chose the season. Of course, with COVID, it's kind of, we've had to redo that process. But it's a real team effort because everyone does the work. So why wouldn't they have a say in it? The other part I'll share, because Camille, I know you're a mom. I heard this from the artist forum. So artists from all different generations of the theater came to a forum. It was really awesome. From people that been here from the beginning, since like the day before practically. And the families all said, can there be a different process? We just can't, these hours, we can't do it. So we're going to move to a 5-day work week. And we know people in Alaska, and this is probably throughout the US too, have to often hold an extra job. So believe me, there's no shame in working, folks. I worked many jobs, no shame in working. I come from working class. Work is good. Good, honest work is good. And you're an artist. So we honor that here. And we have rehearsals in the evening, and we break down calls so it works for parents and childcare. And then again, this, as we get back in person, but even when we're virtual, we're going to a 5-day work week. No more 6 days. Who thought that up? People, no wonder we get burnt out, And we keep saying self-care, but we don't change the number of days we work. So we're going to move in that. We're doing it. Start of this season, we're doing it. And there's a thing called the Lilly Project, where playwrights, female identified playwrights, started to talk about how they have to feel like they have to choose between having a family or being a playwright or being a career theater artist. And Robert Schenken actually jumped on that. I don't know if you know this, Camille. I know you're a part of the Schenken family. Robert Schenken jumped on the Lilly Project, has been promoting that we change our structures to support moms and families, parents and families. Yeah. I just
That's
learned that last
fantastic.
fall from Robert. Yeah. So, but I've talked a lot. I'd love to hear from Jonathan and you, Camille. Yeah.
No, I really appreciate that. And yeah, I think there's a lot of conversation right now about sustainability and why do we need 10 out of 12s? Why do we need 6-day work weeks? How is that humane? Especially because yes, there are so many folks within theater who are doing multiple projects, who hold multiple jobs. So to look at who that cuts out, who that prevents from working and participating in the creative process, how do we re-envision the way that we work so that a greater number of people are able to engage in this art making? That's fantastic. And Jonathan, I'd love to hear from you about what you do, what your path was, and what excites you about the work that you do as well.
Yeah, wow. Thank you so much. So I'll start with my path because this is a really defining piece of my identity. And I've said this so frequently because I went to USC to be a theater actor. I got an agent. I pursued acting. I was getting auditions, but I wasn't getting work. And I realized that even if I got the jobs I was auditioning for, I didn't care about them, and it wouldn't be rewarding to say do a bubblegum commercial in my case. But I got really excited about choosing the stories that or identifying, lifting up the stories that I thought needed to be told, and building community and initiating a project with the artists around me who were also sort of swimming right after college. So I did that I built community, and I did fringe plays. I did I think a very good production in my living room, and when I was very young, and it went very well. But all that's to say that I was super active, exercising my ability, my point of view, my taste, my craft, without making any money, while working full-time, actually more than full-time, working multiple part-time, corporate jobs for 7 years. And that led to a lot of frustration, a lot of disappointment, a lot of distrust with theater and frustration with theater. And I know there are a lot of fellowships, apprenticeships, observerships, on and on and on and on. And I have applied for 7 years. I didn't get any of them. And we can go on and on about how to get them. You have to buy a plane ticket to fly to New York, and then you've got to pay for your own housing, and you get $100 a week and all this. So it's a really broken system. And I felt also unsupported by the lack of system and mentorship on the West Coast. So I was concurrently pursuing, my artist career, hoping that one day it would take off and pay me, while concurrently climbing the ladder in the corporate world. And that was going pretty well. And I got to a point where I'll tell this very brief anecdote because it was impactful for me. It was between me and one other person to lead a $6.5 million corporation where I would have led 125 employees. And I was looking at what houses I would buy. It would have changed my life. And I thought I was going to get it. And I didn't get it. And I was really upset about that. And the person who was retiring, whose position I was going for, she called me into her office, her corner office. And I thought she was going to check in on me to make sure I was okay. And when I got in the office, she was weeping. And she said to me, "I was so worried it was going to be you. Don't get stuck here. Don't make the same mistake I did." And that was one of the most profound moments in my life, because this woman made 6+ figures, and I was, mourning the loss of this future I wanted for myself. But what happened, I think 2 months later, was I got this position at A Noise Within. Obviously, very different financial structure, no doubt, but I'm so much happier. I'm doing exactly what I love. It is my dream job. And I just share that to acknowledge and say, I don't think I truly don't think I'm particularly talented or skilled at this. I mean, I think I have talent. I think I've worked really hard. I've read a play a day for 10 years. I see 200 plays a year. I mean, I've done the work. I have really done the work. So I knew when I wasn't working, I had to create the work on my own. But I think everyone watching this is capable of that. I don't think I was special is my point, but what I want to drill home is that it takes 7 years, and I think 7 years was fast. It was really fast. There was a lot of luck in that. And I think if you're starting your journey, see it for what it is, and don't get hypnotized by this Hollywood, very romanticized idea of discovery and being like shopping for shoes and then like being discovered by an agent and, you know, being on some TV show. That's a really dangerous way to look at your future. So that's something I learned, and I really encourage it people.
That's, I admire you so much. And I remember being on a panel with you a couple of years ago, and you mentioned the play a day. Can you talk about that practice, and if there are other things in that realm that during this 7 years that you were doing to kind of feed your artistic self, feed your creative self?
Yeah, you know, in the kernel of it is not a totally healthy kernel. Like, it comes from, for me, a poverty complex, a fear, you know, I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to have a career. I've wasted my time. So it comes from a place of fear, but I found a way to manage that in, I think, a healthy, productive way. So, you know, I didn't decide this immediately after college, but, you know, 2 or 3 years after graduating, I needed a routine. I needed a way to hold myself accountable to a structure and a discipline where I could engage with art. So I would go to the downtown public library once a week. I would spend the week making a grocery list of all the books I could check out. I learned you can check out, I think, 35 books at a time. There was once I checked out a book, and the person at the counter paused and said, I ordered this book years ago. You're the first person to ever check it out. I mean, it's so fun. So, you know, I did this like going to the gym, you know, and don't get me wrong, I don't really like reading plays. Like, I enjoy them when they're good, but it's not because I'm some unique person who just loves dramaturgy. This was my workout, was my gym, and I saw it supporting me. I also watched a TED Talk every morning for years. I mean, there's a point where I'd seen up to 1,000 TED Talks, and I stopped because I was like, this is enough. And I, you know, not everyone can do this because it costs money, but even when I was making, you know, $10.10 an hour in a call center, I was going to see LA theater every weekend, and I was spending hundreds of dollars on theater a week, which is ridiculous and very unfair and a totally broken system. But, and I'm not even saying I recommend that per se, but I decided that for me was not only valuable, it was necessary and non-negotiable. If I want to be a director, and if I'm not in grad school right now, and if I'm not, you know, directing a play right now, how the heck do I study? How the heck do I exercise? And that's the way I chose to do it. And do not stop until you get the results you want.
It is a workout. That discipline is just astounding to me. And somebody asked where you selected your plays from. How were you kind of self-curating the plays that you were reading?
Yeah, the best part about that is you just follow your interests. I would go down, you know, one rabbit hole after another. When I started, I was looking for plays that I could produce on my own. So I basically read every 2-person drama. You go to DPS and Samuel French, I think now Concord, you know, theatricals. You go on their websites and you search, you know, 2-person plays, or you narrow down the search criteria and you make your list. The Kilroy list is an amazing resource. There's so many amazing lists of unproduced BIPOC plays, Latinx plays. Going on Wikipedia and looking at Pulitzer Prize winning plays, Tony Award winning plays. You know, you can Google search queer Latinx theater and whatever you want to sort of binge experience is what I did. Or I would go on sort of I would study all one playwright, and that's really special. That's really cool to just live in the world of one playwright for a while, and recognize all the parallels and understand that narrative even more. So it's totally up to you.
Leslie, do you have, I mean, that is incredible. Do you have a practice like that? Is there, like, how do you feed your creative muscle, or how do you learn about new works in particular? Because I know that's something that students are often like, I have the will to do it, I don't know where to look.
That's a good one. I have a tiny bit of dyslexia, so reading plays is not easy. And for some people coming over to play reading, even for the first times, that format is just different, right? So it's something to get used to. I do, well, I think it's partly being in the Asian diaspora, that just being aware of new playwrights throughout our own diaspora, wanting to keep up and just see what we're writing about. And then, we have these theater networks now, Latinx Theater Network, or Theater Commons, I should say, and the Black Theater Commons. They have new work festivals. So I try to keep up on those. But someone mentioned in the chat, the New Play Exchange. This has been a real joy for me. I've been able to inherit with this theater position, being a core member of the National New Play Network. And that New Play Exchange is fantastic. You can go on and you can basically see all the new works. And that network is interesting too. You should all be aware they have fellowships for producing, for directors as well. They may have it for actors, but I know for sure for directors and producers. So, and they have their own conference where they showcase work. So that's a great way to be abreast of new plays coming along. Also, the Kennedy Center, I just got done directing a new work project in partnership with National New Play Network. They have a whole educational process around new work, and they have assistant director fellowships, dramaturgy fellowships as well. So you might want to be aware of the Kennedy Center educational initiative or program as well, because they help develop new work. So, but I tend to keep an eye out that way. The Kilroy's list is a big one for me too. And then I just start talking to people. But also, you know what I do? Sign up for newsletters. I get a Noise Within's newsletter. I get newsletters from East West Players. I get newsletters from all the theaters around the country. It fills up your inbox for sure. But you start to see what they're producing or what their new work festivals are doing. And so you can get a little trend feel, kind of a feel for what's trending. And then if you sign up for the Broadway On Demand, and Concord kind of has an announcement thing, you start to get their newsletters about what their new lists are, of what's been published or things like that. So I try to stay abreast that way. And just word of mouth too. What are you reading, or what do you recommend? What's good, Yeah, I want to reinforce something that, Jonathan, you brought up. You said it's dangerous to think you're going to get discovered if you're working behind the counter selling shoes or doing some kind of job at a department store, which is this kind of old idea really about Hollywood, right? It's kind of this historical Hollywood notion. I think that's true. I want to double down on that, because what that says is, number one, you're not active in creating your own destiny, your own life story, what you want. Like I'm with you, Jonathan. I don't know how or why, but I just kept at it. And again, I wasn't upwardly mobile. I just wanted to keep doing it. And if you get to a place where you can teach something or offer something, contribute, make genuine relationships. A lot of what happens, and actually the Mellon Foundation is working on this with their National Playwright in Residency program. You can, theaters apply for grants through Mellon when the cycle comes up, and you can actually apply to get funding so a playwright can be in residence at your theater. And what's beautiful about that is they said we wanted to shift it from making a deep relationship with a playwright versus it just being transactional. You're going to produce their play, you pay the money for the rights, Maybe they'll come in and be at a first rehearsal. Awesome. You may even talk to them on the phone or not, but you produce their play. So they wanted to move it from transactional to more relational. So one of the things I would share with our viewers here is that think about relationships. People always talk about that networking, but what's a genuine relationship? And I love that, Jonathan, come from where your interest lies. Also, where do you have a gift? Start to recognize you have gifts. That's part of your own empowerment. Don't downplay yourself. You've got gifts. You were brought here with gifts. You've been honing them, conscious or unconscious, for a long time. Use your gifts and contribute. That's one of the best offer. Make an offering, and that's one of the best ways to start a relationship. And then an exchange can begin, you know? So I lead with building theater relationally, not transactionally. It's very easy when you're in a position of power or as a director to be transactional just because you want to do that thing, that play, that project, that vision. But how are you actually leading with best practices around relationship building? And I'll say something. She's no longer in the Los Angeles ecology, but she's in the National Theater ecology. Seema Sueco. I love Seema. She had the theater in San Diego, right? And now she's the deputy artistic director at the Arena Stage. And she has a book. I can't think of the name of it offhand, but it's around consensus building. So for instance, I'm looking at a particular playwright. I won't say yet until we announce. I've got to work some things out first. But we're looking at having a reading series to uplift a particular community so that our community will be brought along with that canon of that playwright. And then along the way, we're not only educating our audiences, supporting them to have more learning around it, but then eventually when we produce, they feel like, and we get feedback along the way as we do these sort of community readings, and they'll read the parts. And we'll do our best to not do yellow face, black face, of course, red face, but really thoughtfully invite artists in with the community to read. And that's part of how we'll build consensus for producing plays in that particular playwright's canon, their repertoire. So how are we actually building consensus? And I love that you mentioned it, Jonathan. I come from activism, which also meant being a community activist, a community builder, community organizer, if you will. Communities are waiting to be organized, not colonized, but exchanged with, so we can all organize for a stronger ecology. So if you're not used to that, learn from folks who do community organizing. Support them, help contribute. That's a great way to launch into relationship building.
I love the idea of a theater or of a production as a community, because it is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so approaching directing or producing as community building feels like a really healthy model that gets us away from the like imposition of one person's views, you know?
It keeps art from being elitist. There's this notion that you come, like Center Theater, you come down, it's the Dorothy Chandler and the opera and the symphony are there too. It kind of has this Western European idea of elitism. But it's really the story of the peoples. As you decolonize and indigenize, like the Tlingit people, Tsimshian Haida, they see storytelling as a way of life. Art and culture are a way of life. It's not an added on commodity that you get if you have enough money you can go to, or if you have a little in for a comp ticket, you know, which comes from an idea of privilege as well. So it brings it horizontal, brings it to community. Yeah.
Jonathan, you were going to talk about the finding plays thing. You said you had
I wanted to offer
to bring into the space.
A really quick thing that I just remembered. Back when I was a recent grad and just beginning all this, I thought I wanted to start a theater company. So I did with a friend, and we made a website, and we like met once a week as a staff, and we like produced one play. So, you know, and then it ended. It wasn't really a very long lasting theater company. But because I started a theater, because I was an artistic director with my Gmail account with the signature of artistic director, I would, if I found a play I wanted to read, I would email the agent and I would say, I'm considering this play for my season at XYZ Theater Company. And I got plays like right when the playwright finished them. And I read like 7 years ago plays that are happening now at the Geffen and Pasadena Playhouse and CTG. It is so funny. Like you can literally, they don't all say yes, but just like lean into your power. I mean, if you want something, ask. And I find that not all the times, but sometimes there's a lot of energy around supporting that. And then I wanted to jump off of something Leslie said about consensus organizing. One of the things that's really stuck with me about Seema Sueco's methodology of CO, consensus organizing, is when she plans a season, if there's a play she's interested in, and let's say the play engages with the Latinx community, she'll take it to leaders in the Latinx community and ask 2 questions. And the first is, well, I guess the first is, will you read this play, right? You don't want to assume, right? But if they choose to read the play, the first question is, does this story authentically speak to your experience? And if the answer is yes, well, if the answer is no, they don't do the play. But if the answer is yes, the next question is, would you want to come to this play? And if the answer isn't yes to both of those questions, they don't do the play. And that just seems really straightforward. But because this is an important piece, because I have shared that little anecdote with a lot of theater leaders at some very prestigious white institutions. And a very common reaction to that Seema has received also is an AD saying, an artistic director saying, it is our job to find for people what they need to see. It is our job to find the stories and bring them the stories. We are the experts. To which Seema and I would say, you, artistic director, are the expert in the theatrical craft, in theater as a form of storytelling, but you are not the expert in the story. And that is a huge difference. So if you're not willing to engage the experts in that story, doesn't matter how skilled you are at everything else, it's not going to work.
Thank you for that. I think that's a really important distinction.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are you the expert in? And it's not that story. And I also want to bring in this idea based on your like artistic director with a Gmail address. We talked a little bit when we spoke earlier this week, and we have talked a lot about owning your artistry in this space over the past few weeks. Owning, like, that nobody has to say, boop, you're a playwright. You can come into a creative space and own, hello, I am a playwright. And it doesn't matter if you've been produced yet. It doesn't matter if somebody has anointed you as a playwright. That is part of your power and your artistry to own that. I'm wondering if that resonates with either of you, and what that journey was like for you of being able to say, like, I am an artistic leader, right? I love, Leslie, your bio says you're a national leader in American theater. Mm-hmm. And it is true. And I wonder what that was like for you, and if you can talk about kind of coming into that power, coming into that artistic identity.
That's good. Thank you. Yes, we did touch on this, in our earlier conversation. Well, and I wrote down ask. I love that, Jonathan. I have to tell you a quick anecdote, but this is also what led to me feeling empowered. And I was just telling some folks today around a national issue of Yellowface going on. I was on a call earlier, that sometimes the road is bumpy. There's a lot of learning curves. It's growing pains, right? As I can speak as a woman of color right now, that sometimes we start out leading with our victimization around internalized oppression. But as you empower yourself and heal there, empowerment helps you to heal. So taking the initiative, like Jonathan says, to ask, where can you say, I'm just going to go ahead and take charge here. I'm going to contribute something. And it comes from you, not waiting. I used to wait for, I was telling these two earlier this week. I'm not a practicing Catholic anymore, although I love the communities that I grew up with there. But Catholicism has a way of creating martyrdom. I think a lot of Christian organized religion does. And it gets you in a place where you work really hard and then you get resentful. It's a pattern. I believe me, it's well honed. I've studied it. And I've had to work my way out of it, heal from it. And then that resentment is a great tool, instrument for divisiveness. Because then you get mad at other people as if they put that thing on you. But wait a minute, I chose it. So I started to realize what I'm choosing. But then I also started to realize, what am I choosing? Ask that question, what am I choosing? And this is when I really think something shifted. Back in about 1993, I looked at a couple of friends who are also Asian women, and I said, hey, let's go to the World Women's Conference. It's in Beijing, China. They're like, why would we go there? I go, because we're women. And they go, well, we don't get it. How do you do it? I go, well, I've been learning. I think there's a governmental, we're not governmental, but there's a non-governmental conference. We could just go. And they go, I don't get it. How do we do that? What? I don't get it. I go, well, it's put on, it's organized by the UN. They go, okay. I go, I'll call the UN. They go, you what? I said, I'm going to do it. I'm calling the UN. I called the UN, people. I just called up the UN, the United Nations. And there was a phone menu. And it was one, there was a, you could press the thing for the World Women's Conference. So I did. Later that day, this is when we still had faxes, I was faxed a long stream of documents talking about it and forms to apply. And then I realized we needed a sponsor. So I found an organization. There was an Asian Women leadership kind of group in Los Angeles that said, we'll sponsor you. And then we got East West Players to give us a night to fundraise. But it was a night of community building, bringing Asian leaders, Asian women. We included men because we said, men, unless you have your liberation, we won't have ours. So we had this beautiful program we put together. And then our pledge to all the donors was, when we come back, we'll create a show about the experience. So you'll get a report back through our piece. So I look at all the things we did. We called the UN. We figured out how to get in. We organized. We actually created art around it. We became producers, writers, directors, actors in it. We were already actors. And that started me on a journey. And then UC Irvine called, Cliff Faulkner called and said, hey, I hear you're kind of an interesting instructor. Will you come and be a guest lecturer? I didn't even know what that was. I thought I'd go and give a lecture. And they go, no. Actually, it's a particular entry point guest teacher. So you'll teach a class. So I went down, and the head of the department at that time said, visit each class and tell us what we're missing. I said, oh, that's interesting. Okay. So I said, what you're missing is exactly what we did. This was right around when independent film was really starting to take off. And I said, look, I know I'm a woman of color. I was never going to get it handed to me. So I've created my own projects. They go, will you teach on that? And that became a course called the Self-Starter. And I'm being asked to teach it again. It's kind of coming back around. It's interesting. But in that class, we learned how to grant write. We learned how to pitch a project. But we also did some deep meditation so that you would actually find out what you deeply care about and stemmed a project idea from that. And I found out, and if some of you are still in undergrad or grad, look for an undergraduate or graduate research grant at your university. They're sitting there, and artists almost never go for them because they think, well, we're not science and we're not medical, or, but actually there's grant money for the artist. So you can produce at your school and start a track record of receiving grants. When you have a track record, you're more experienced. They know that you can manage it, and you actually begin to be more sort of attractive for being a grantee again and again and again. So again, a lot of times that money just sits there because artists don't realize. And I started to change the language to that of science, where, artists would say, or actors would say, we're not scientists. I go, well, we experiment every time we rehearse and do these, repetitions. That's actually an experiment. And then I would ask, what are your findings? And what were the outcomes? And if you notice, grant language actually asks for outcomes. So I just shifted my language to that. And they started to see, the students started to, and I did too, started to see, oh, we can do this. So that empowerment has a lot to do with and Jonathan, you talked about this in our conversation too. You know, cross sector isn't a bad thing. Doing other jobs, you have skills there that transfer. We talk about gaining skills in theater or in the arts that transfer to other sectors. You have work from other sectors that transfers beautifully to what we do too. So that's an example of the back and forth of wherever you've been, you've learned a lot. You can apply it. Yeah. It might be creatively how you figure out to apply it, but it's worth that process of examining for yourself your experience and how it applies.
That's so beautiful that your experience is not a liability, it's an asset,
Wow.
regardless of where it was and what other jobs you've had. And you're always going to find places to bring that into it.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that about like being a self-starter. There's been so much this summer about empowerment and kind of what are the skills that you need to fundraise for yourself. And
Yeah,
then
I would put a challenge out to this cohort. I dare you to ask. I just dare you. Have the audacity to ask questions. Jonathan, you're just a beautiful model for that. Yeah.
yes, and get
Oh, sorry. Didn't do that.
oh good.
Right.
Oh, I thought we lost you for a second. Yes, and I love that about the research funding. Yeah, there's a lot of funding at colleges and universities, and artists absolutely should go for that go for that money. Jonathan, I wonder about your journey and like owning yourself as an artist, as a director, as an artistic director. Can you talk about that process and if you ever ran into the sort of like I think some people think, well, how do I claim that space? How do I claim my artistic self?
Oh, yes. There is so much. I mean, there's also like major imposter syndrome, and I chose not to go to grad school. So that's very strange for me because, and I've essentially never taken a directing class. So, everything I've learned has been, I always see the finished product and I sort of work backwards about how I would do it. And I find what works and doesn't. And I apply a lot of sort of corporate culture, not the negative stuff, but the positive stuff. So that's been interesting. And I always say that, one day I'll be directing at CTG and they're going to come in the room and be like, what is he doing? Because I don't really know what I'm doing, but that's fine. So what I want to say in response to that question is, I think the most interesting part of how I could answer that is how I started identifying as a director. So like I said, I studied as an actor. And then when I wasn't feeling satisfied with the opportunities, I wasn't feeling nurtured by those stories, I chose to initiate projects. But even before I had anything to direct, even before I had ever directed really, I chose to just tell everyone I'm a director. I chose that because I want to be one, I'm just going to accept that I am a director. So I would tell everyone that and say, if you have a script, send it to me. Yeah, I'm looking for projects. And I would ask all my USC faculty if I could go back to any classes they're teaching and introduce myself as a director and offer my, not necessarily mentorship, but collaboration. So there was this whole like graduating class of emerging artists who were looking for sort of connective tissue. And I was there to fill in a lot of gaps early on in my career. Again, it was mostly for free. I wasn't getting paid for it, but I made the choices that seemed to serve me at the time. And the other thing I want to acknowledge about that is, I don't really believe that you get to a point where, at least I've not gotten to a point where I feel like I know what I'm doing. Because not only is every show totally different, every cast, every theater, every story, the audience is different, the politics are different, right? Now coronavirus on Zoom, that's different. There's a lot to learn. But more specifically than that generalization, I remember years ago, before I had really started directing, Snehal Desai of East West Players, when he gave me an opportunity, and it's a bunch of people who you've built relationship with over maybe 3 years, maybe 10 years. It's not immediately, but after years, those relationships will hopefully produce one opportunity. He gave me an opportunity to direct the classic Sanskrit drama Shakuntala at A Noise Within, a reading of it. I didn't know what I was up. I mean, to direct on a 365 seat theater, thrust stage, a Sanskrit drama, I was so overwhelmed. So there's a lot of discomfort, is all I'm trying to say. But the discomfort isn't a bad thing, right? There were some sleepless nights of me calling my mentors and asking, how do I possibly attack this, if you will, because it was so foreign to me or unfamiliar to me. But I did. It was probably fine. It was good enough. I learned from it. And I survived, and I moved through that discomfort. The same thing happened last August when someone I met nearly 7 years ago finally called me up after years of that relationship and said, would you like to direct at the 2,600 seat Walt Disney Concert Hall with a 125 person symphony? Holy moly. And you're devising in 4 weeks, 45 minutes of content with movers, with moving actors. And so terror, right? But so it's not about knowing what you're doing and not having that discomfort, at least in my career, and I think this is supporting me in my career sort of snowballing and finding some momentum, is that I accept the discomfort, never to a level where it's toxic or unhealthy. I learn to manage it well, but I lean into the discomfort and I recognize it as a normal part of the process. I always call my parents, call my mom and dad, and I'm frustrated, and I say the play's not gonna work, it's awful, it's crap, and they always say, Jonathan, this happens every time. Like, do you know this is a part of your process? Like, you don't need to worry. Do you remember what happens next? And the same thing happened when I was asked to direct this past January's Ovation Awards at Ace Hotel. I'd never directed an awards ceremony. What does that even mean? I still don't know what it means, but I learned, I did it. And I guess you just have to do it.
I appreciate that so much. And thank you for being so candid with that. I think that's, if it's not, I mean, one thing that I try to tell students, and it's so much easier to tell students than to recognize this for myself, right? That if it's not scary, it's not new. And if you are thinking about, especially like applying for a job and you just have 100% of the qualifications, then is it going to be enough of a challenge? So like, yes, this fear and this discomfort is what pushes us forward. So gosh, thank you so much for sharing that. Leslie, you're nodding. Is that?
Oh yeah. I mean, there's something about, didn't we get into this to discover and have newness? I think I'm with you, Jonathan. I'm like, I've been walking the planet a while and I'm like, do I know what's happening? You know, but you just get in there and you figure it out, you know, and when it comes down to it, it's people managing a project together. It's, again, it comes to facilitation. Can you hold space? Can you support folks to bring forth their ideas so they feel genuinely invited and to the table, and support them to flex that muscle at the table? You know, can you, like Bill Rausch will say, the best idea in the room wins. I mean, he really means it. So if you come with that idea, we're all learning here, you set up a learning environment for everyone. It's a new project. Even if it's the 100th time that play has been produced, it's still this combination of folks, you know, with these circumstances. So it's, I kind of love that newness. You do learn to embrace the discomfort, that little, okay, here we go, people. You know, you're all going to jump off a cliff together, right? So I love that.
Go ahead, Leslie. Did I interrupt?
Oh, please.
I just want to add, I think an important maybe button to what I just offered was, you know, what you lean on, or what I lean on when I'm in those moments of discomfort, because it's easy to be like, oh, well, you know, Jonathan knows how to direct, like it was uncomfortable and then he just directed it. Like the key for me, at least, is choosing to believe, is trusting that I have good taste. I mean, that's a choice I'm making. I'm sure there are many people who disagree with me. But I choose to believe that I can tell when story is being communicated. I can tell when what's in front of me is engaging. I can tell when I want to pull out my phone and check my emails. Like, that's a problem if I'm directing a play.
Mhm.
So at the end of the day, even if you don't understand the text, you know, usually you can go back to the text if you're directing, and that there the answer's there. But even if that's not supporting you, just listen to your body. And I don't want to oversimplify or over romanticize it, because I'm sure some people are listening and being like, oh yeah, listen to your body. But like, truly, I think it's a shame that there's such a narrative of pedigree around our career, such a narrative of expertise and resume. It's just gross. It is just gross. You know when something is engaging. Like, it can be anything on YouTube. Like, you know if something is working, and you may not know how to make it work if it's not, but you have an idea. So just lean into your ideas and trust, you know.
I agree with you. Absolutely. You just said something that brought something to mind. You don't have to know everything. Just because you're the director, or you feel like you're the actor in the lead role, or maybe you're a designer, you're supposed to know everything about set. I actually started something I didn't know was revolutionary. When I direct, I include all the designers and the producers on the thread. Apparently, they've been used to just each designer speaks only to the director. And then when you get to tech, you all meet. I go, no. Shouldn't we all be on the same thread? Because what if the scenic designer says, I want to change my palette, the color palette, and the costume designer didn't know? I mean, it could be me. I'm supposed to be the conduit to inform that, or to communicate that. But what if they're all talking to each other? Oh, if you do that, then I could, sure, then that would, blah, blah, blah. And now we have a really great creative conversation. So again, it comes down to how can you change the structures so that that collaboration can occur? And then you share the responsibility, you share even the stresses, the little pinch points of where you're not sure what, you share that. And the same thing in tech. I don't sit behind and watch everybody work. I go around and go, what do you think about that, to the costume designer? And then I'll go, let's pause for a moment. Can we just check with the lighting designer? Does that work for you? Can we swap that out right now? Or do we have the resource or the, situation where we can actually remedy this together? Because it seems like that might be sitting on lighting, but lighting may go, well, actually it's the costume color. Oh, okay. So there's so much great communication that can go on. So once again, I see myself as a facilitator, of the space, as much as the buck usually stops with you as the director and the artistic director for sure. But how do we share the responsibility? And that actually creates a lot of great solution finding and just process.
You said you used this word conduit, and somebody back at the beginning of the session in the chat said gatekeeper. And I feel like and it's not just in a rehearsal space or in a rehearsal process, and I don't think it's unique to theater. I know it's not unique to theater, but just challenging the idea that information should roll only through one person, I think is really interesting when we're talking about leadership, that doesn't mean that you are a gatekeeper, or that there has to be that funnel. Do you know what I mean? And I really appreciate that framing.
There's a couple things that come to mind. As you can tell, I'm working to break down barriers where there hadn't been transparency. So part of dismantling white supremacist culture is creating transparency. But I'll even say this to our BIPOC folks and those who come from marginalized groups. I never go to a meeting alone, because I could be targeted. I could be scapegoated as a woman of color, as a person of color. I could be also misquoted, misrepresented. So if I come with my producer, who is already starting to demonstrate and work very hard at self-education around being a very willing, a very enthusiastic accomplice to dismantling white supremacy. And if I can, I will bring many people with me, because again, they do all the work. So for instance, I'm in a co-production right now with ACT, the American Conservatory Theater, on a virtual project that Peter J. Kuo is directing. And I said, I'm bringing my team. My team is multi-generational. My team is BIPOC. And they do the work with me. So why would I go back and only have the information sift through my lens? Yeah, that's bias, implicit bias. So there's that part. Plus, then they can answer questions directly with different departments. It just makes sense. It's just there's something practical about it. But I also want to say, this comes to mind too, Jonathan, you said something about, what was it? If you're not sure, find out, and about the discomfort. Remember, when we have discomfort, I'm total culprit of this. So I call myself on this. In fact, I meditate every day on building, with humility, building a broader and broader analysis, politically educating myself around equity, diversity, inclusion, historical context, learning history, and actually seeing the complicated weave of how history has actually played itself out with these oppressive patterns, so that when I go into a situation, it's never just that person. I don't problematize it. I look at the greater patterns that are going on. Oh, that's what's playing out. But just note that when we have discomfort, we will often default back to what is normalized, what is more comfortable. So it is a challenge and a great calling to be an artist. So all of you viewing, and all of you who brought us here, Jonathan, Camille, and Felipe, it's a great calling. I have great respect for each of you, because it's not a comfortable, it's not an easy calling to be an artist. It means you are taking on being a storyteller that really can make change in this world, to heal, to bring forth history and stories, experiences that have been erased or forgotten, sometimes conveniently forgotten, or because of the replication of, oppressive patterns. So it's a tremendous calling to be an artist. It's not easy, but just know that's part of it. It's going to be discomfort, because you're forging really important ground for change, for liberation for all peoples. That, to me, is the calling of an artist. You all may have different emphasis and different passions, aspects of it, and you may not want that calling. That's okay. I see it that way, and it has stood me in good stead to see it that way, because my ego gets right-sized, and I understand service better. And I think I have been able to be in support and in service of great artistry being created. But for that, important relationships and healing in community because of it. That might be the actual greater calling for me anyway. Yeah.
Thank you. And that's, this is such a reframing, I think, of kind of like traditional views of a rehearsal space, the role of a director, the role of an artistic director. And we had a question about, like, what do you do when people expect you to kind of, quote, have all the answers? And this is for either of you, because I know you both work this way. Are people ever uncomfortable with, I guess, having more power, or having power be more evenly distributed in a space? And is that, and if folks are listening and they're thinking, like, this is really resonating with me, this is the kind of space that I would like to be a part of and facilitate, do you need to kind of bring people along the journey with that? Do you know what I mean?
Well, I know I just spoke. I want to make sure I hand it off to Jonathan very quickly here. I'll tell you what I learned. And again, this is about having audacity. I have the audacity. It occurred to me, oh, that's some audacity one day. I have the audacity to actually lead most meetings, national meetings even, or very much right in our organization. I'll say, and at board meetings, I said, honor and pleasure of serving in this position. And I will tell you right now that, at the risk of looking like I don't have any answers, I can't make a decision, I'm incompetent, I will share power. So that means I'm calling you all in to be a part of this process. And some of you lead very extroverted, so you have, and you think, or your processing is different than others. Some have a thought right away. Some need time to really ponder a minute, and everything in between. And we all embody probably all of that. So different subjects, different problem solving, different parts of our process, you may have any of those different rates of processing and ways you express yourself. So let's just set the tone now that we take time. We decolonize and dismantle white supremacy by not having a false sense of urgency here. We're the deciders together. So if it takes longer because we need time to ponder, or some folks have been able to weigh in, but we're waiting for others, do we schedule another meeting so they don't feel on the spot like people are waiting for the answer? But what does that mean for the process? What will serve the process and the people in it to get where we need to go? And so sharing power as a woman of color at the risk of looking incompetent is critical. So I name that right up front. Yeah. So I don't have to have all the answers to answer your question. And it means the group sourcing the group who's got tremendous talent in thinking. Why would I override that thinking I have all the best? No. And the collaboration of it together is inspiring. That is amazing. Yeah. But I want to pass it off to Jonathan.
That is the perfect like launch point. Like you could not, like I have so much, I'm so excited about how you just ended that. Because what's popping for me right now, and this has been a slow transition, or it's been a transition for me over my still new emerging career as a director and an arts leader. When I was younger, when I was earlier in my career, like just beginning, I felt, there was so much ego. I felt such a sense of, I needed my shows that I directed to be excellent because I felt like my career depended on it. I felt such a need to control, and not in a, toxic, unsupportive way. I still think I hope I maintained a supportive, nurturing environment, but it was very much about the director has a vision and I'm hired to execute my vision, and the theater wanted a specific product and they hired me because I do that thing. And there was a real, or if that's not the case, even earlier than that, I wanted to build a vision, build an aesthetic, build a name so that I'd get hired for that thing. And, there's a sense of, in my journey, the ability to not need any project to be my vision. It does, I wish I could be as selfless to say like, that just comes organically, but I also recognize it comes for me from a place of privilege of having 7 plays to direct in a year. So I don't feel like, and I also don't want to suggest that being flexible or collaborative introduces risk to the project. Like I'm not suggesting, everyone has so much to offer, but it was just, I just noticed for myself that as I started getting more work, this is what it was. I felt more secure in my career. I felt more secure that work was coming. I felt secure that I was recognized and am recognized and respected in Los Angeles as a theater director. When that happened, it became a lot easier for me to be more and more flexible. I'm not proud of that, but I'm acknowledging that when you're early in your journey, it can be hard to share when it feels like this is my one show of the year. I'm inviting everyone to it. I need this to be that thing. So that's sort of the thing that comes to mind. Just be aware of it.
Oh my goodness, thank you both. Yeah, go ahead, Leslie.
Jonathan, do you find this, to your point, absolutely need to feel like you've brought something together so that people start to recognize you and hire you more, right? And get a sense of you. What I am noticing is more and more artists will say, oh, I love the room. I love the room that you set. So it's interesting that the artwork is sort of the thing that we think is going to be recognizable for folks. For the collaborators themselves, it's about how is that space conducted, so I felt like I could be my best self or bring forth questions or even maybe push back on something and go, really, is that what we want to do? How are we creating a space? And this harkens back to our conversation where Jonathan, you said, how do we set up a culture that normalizes being able to have a difficult conversation where someone might push back in a collaborative process, or maybe it's a staff meeting or a one-on-one conversation with a staff member or a community member? How do we look at the fact that if you set the space up well, all of it can live there, so no one has to know everything, and we can even have a good debate about it, you know? Yeah, that brings out amazing process in art, I think.
It does, and it speaks to like this idea of creative voice, or like what's your aesthetic, that feels that can sound very external and extrinsic. Like if you're a designer, oh, that person uses a lot of this type of light, or that's their like signature. But what you're talking about is how you show up.
Yes.
It's the person that you are, and the energy that you bring into a space, and the values that you bring into that space, and that is not something that anybody needs to give you permission to do.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I feel like that's just going back to that poll at the beginning, and people saying that like, I don't know who I am as an artist. But if you're tapping into your values, and if you're bringing those values into the creative spaces that you're in, that is your creative voice, because that is your full self coming into that space.
Yeah, yeah.
We have, this has gone incredibly quickly. We have another 10 minutes. So I invite folks who are here to get any additional questions in. And we've been talking about kind of a lot of these topics around artistic leadership. Lisa Drain was one of our first guests, and Lisa brought in this whole conversation about her relationship to failure, the idea of failure, and that she has really moved away from thinking of like, oh, that was a failure, that was a success. And she now talks about, she doesn't shy away from things that didn't work. She doesn't like, oh, I'm going to leave that out of this grant application, right? I wonder what y'all's relationship is to that concept of like failure, things that didn't work well, because, you know, like Jonathan was saying, I think there's so much pressure as a director, as an artistic leader, of like every single project has to be a hit or has to be, quote, successful. What comes up for each of you as you think about that, and kind of some of the implications around what it means of like failure and success?
I don't know that I have a good answer, other than, you know, I know when I'm satisfied. I know when I'm proud. You know, I've done shows that I am so proud of, that got so little attention, didn't get any, you know, great reviews or you know, awards or anything. And there are shows that I'm insecure about that are getting a lot of attention. And so, you know what, it's a weird thing. On one hand, I see myself as a surrogate to the audience. And I try and anticipate how will they experience this and how will they engage with this and what's their sort of, where are they leaning in and when are they leaning back? But, you know, I'm sort of working through this out loud real time, but oh my gosh, I don't know. I mean, let me say this. I really am attracted to directing as a craft, and I'm very interested in experimenting in that craft and like understanding what it means to be a director and what's possible. And I have different goals for every project, and I like to try and notice when something's failing, and I like to solve it. It doesn't always happen, but I think for me, it's, I guess the big picture zoom out, you know, observation about all the gibberish I'm saying is that I think it has to be separated from ego. Like if I carry such fear of being judged for what I put in front of people, then that's just going to be pretty traumatic and pretty heavy. And I can't possibly, I don't want to control everything. So I don't know. It's a great conversation. Leslie, give a better answer than me.
Can you ask me the question again? It's that kind of a thing, isn't it? Yeah, it's
Yeah. Well, I think and I appreciate what Jonathan was saying about like this being a surrogate for the audience and also like the responsibility around this. But like, I don't, I used to be with Circle X Theater, and we felt such pressure because we were all volunteer, and we only kind of had it in us to do 1 or 2 shows a year. So you feel this like, oh, it's got to be everything that we possibly dreamed it could be,
yeah.
and it's got to be a hit. It's got to be like, I hope people like this. How do you kind of move through something that maybe didn't resolve in the way that you hoped it would, or something that just didn't, maybe nobody came, because sometimes you have a show and nobody comes. What's been your relationship with that in this business and in this field that is kind of episodic in a way?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Like, how do you move past something that maybe didn't hit in the way that you hoped it would?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I think it what comes to mind is, if I can share a little bit about lived experience, certainly I've had many failures. Whether you apply for something and you didn't get it, or, oh my God, getting in front of a casting director for a TV and film and you know you blew it. Even if you got it by the third take, but so there's all kinds of ways we get indications like, oh, that didn't go so well, But I think what I've learned over time is we spend time, of course, feeling the pain of, or the discomfort of failure, right? It's natural, like, oh, and you feel bad, or my perfectionist self will run rampant all over that. But I think over time, I think I've learned to practice, what should I be doing different? Just start a battery of questions and maybe this is, I think, hearing Lisa talk a little bit about failure, it's actually a learning process, even if at first it stings. Like you said, Jonathan, your ego has to take that hit first. And then once you kind of come out of that, I go, well, did I spend enough time on the lines? Did I think about what it was going to be like? I mean, even if I got to set my living room up like I'm walking into the casting thing and literally walk in and pretend. I mean, that's what we do. We rehearse, right? And rehearsal, we know, is powerful and important. So I used to have to realize, how am I actually setting myself up for success too? Did I do these things that I know myself? Did I do all that? And there's something intuitive about that. Even recently I said, oh, it's as simple as, I dropped this thing along the way going from one room to the next, but I had a little voice say, you know what, make 2 trips. But I was determined not to have to make 2 trips. And I dropped the thing and it spilled a bunch of crap. And I'm like, but I didn't listen to the little voice that said, just make 2 trips. What are you doing? You're loading yourself. Why? What? Make 2 trips. And I didn't listen, or I defied it. I went, I can do it. And so I'm getting better too at listening to that inner voice that says, maybe you want to do this, or is this the right project? Or do you need more information? I said this to a friend the other day. I used to think that I couldn't make decisions. I was incompetent. But then I realized, oh, it was my dad. This is a few years back. My dad would say, well, do you have enough information to make that decision? I went, oh, I don't. He goes, it sounds like you need more information. You need to ask more questions. And I went, oh, right. All of a sudden that crap about I'm incompetent went away, because I thought, I need more information. I'm lacking enough information to feel like I'm making an educated or informed decision, right? So I think those kinds of things along the way, those kinds of lessons start to actually tell me, ask questions. Back to listening and asking questions. What did I not do? What could I have done? And these are typical kind of debrief types of processes. Like, do we debrief with ourselves? We tend to bring teams together to debrief a project or a situation that occurred. But do we debrief ourselves? What could I have done? How did that go? What about that? So we can learn going forward. you know? Yeah.
Can I add something briefly to that?
Please.
You know, I
Yeah.
think I'm having such an interesting reaction to the word failure. Like, I think
Yeah.
I think my discomfort in the answer is just sort of illuminating of my relationship to the word.
Mm.
But I do want to acknowledge that I think where failure, I think where I'm more familiar with failure, not that I don't fail in my art, but it doesn't feel like a failure. Like, I'm trying to connect it to my art, and it's like, I don't have a relationship with what I put on stage that I could even label it failure, because that feels like a very personal thing. So, but if I make it about me and I think about like, what could a failure look like? I think about, you know, if I have caused harm or voiced a microaggression, or, you know, my impact was different than my intent. And I, as I'm sort of being curious right now on live internet of what failure even means,
Yeah.
I think I'm accepting it to mean to be surprised by by something that I've done wrong. Like, it's, and in that case, if I've wronged someone or harmed someone, and I have, and I will, this is a long way of me getting to, when we talk about failure, I just want to introduce the word accountability also.
Yes.
And, you know, it's so important to me
Mm-hmm.
that I really be thoughtful, and it can be painful, it can be uncomfortable, it can be frustrating, it can be embarrassing, it can be shameful, but I go through all of that to get to the accountability. And I had a mentor, and it's the same mentor who told me not to get stuck at the corporate job. She said, it's your job as a leader to hear the feedback in anything. So no matter how cruel or angry or furious or unaccountable or vicious something might be, if you're in a position of leadership, and you don't need to be in a position of leadership, but if you choose to take on the responsibility that comes with leadership, you have essentially, without saying that you're not going to take care of yourself, because self-care is always important, but you've essentially given up permission to be defensive. You've given up permission to defend yourself. I mean, not fully, but the point is, when something happens, if I get feedback, whatever it might be, it is my job to search for, where am I accountable? And it may just be like 1% of what's going on in that moment, but that's my job as a leader. So failure to me is when it's a pretty radical readjustment of the spine that comes with a lot of discomfort, which for me is I don't know that failure in the way I'm naming it now exists in my art, but it does exist in the relationships and the collaboration that produce my art, our art. Yeah.
I love that, Jonathan. Yes, accountability is huge. And
Yes.
in fact, I mentioned, I know we're right at time, but I mentioned it takes time, especially those of us from marginalized communities, to heal your own internalized depression, because it's easy to lead from victimization before we get enough healing and empowerment to feel like we're fully leading. However, don't give up, because leadership can mean many things. It can mean you take initiative to move a table, or say, hey, can I help you? It doesn't have to be you're always at the helm, right? It could be taking initiative to support, contribute, like I mentioned. I put this out to folks who study with me. If you're not leading, you're a victim. That was told to me, and that's what helped me keep moving toward my empowerment. How can I lead? How can I be of service? And that really started to shift things for me. Yeah.
I thank you both so much for your time today, and I feel like I needed this conversation. I learned so much, and it's been such a pleasure being in this conversation with both of you today. Folks in the chat, can you? Yes, I see the thank yous coming in. Thank you to both of you, and I hope you have a fantastic weekend.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Camille. Thank you to everybody viewing. Amazing. Thank you, Jonathan. Always amazing to share space with you.
Thank you, Leslie. Thanks, Camille.
Thank you both. Thank you, Felipe, in the chat. Yes.
And all of you.
All right, and folks, we will see you for our very last session next week, where we're going to try to pull together everything that we've been doing over the past few weeks, and you all will get the chance to take some more time for introspection and set some goals on a personal level and a creative level for your next steps after the series ends. So thank you both so much, and everyone watching, have a fantastic weekend.